September 15, 1954, 2:00 a.m. The corner of Lexington Avenue and 52nd Street in New York City was packed with 5,000 men. They weren't there for a parade or a protest or a celebration. They were there to watch Marilyn Monroe's dress blow up over her head. Again and again and again. 14 times the director would make her stand over that subway grate. 14 times the wind machine would blast air up through the metal bars. 14 times her white dress would fly up past her waist while thousands of men cheered and whistled and shouted. And 14 times Joe DiMaggio stood in the crowd watching his wife be turned into a spectacle. His face getting redder, his jaw getting tight, his fists clenching harder. By the time the cameras stopped rolling at 5:00 a.m., Joe knew his marriage was over. Marilyn knew that the most famous 7 seconds of film in her entire career had just cost her everything. This is the untold story of the dress that flew up, husband who watched, and the marriage that ended that night. The scene itself seemed simple on paper. Marilyn Monroe, playing a character called the Girl, walks over a subway grate. A train passes below. Air rushes. Her white dress billows. She tries to hold it down, laughing. The whole thing should take maybe 20 seconds of screen time in the finished movie. But director Billy Wilder had an idea. Why not shoot this scene on location in New York? At night, on a real street, with real people watching? It would create buzz. It would create publicity. It would create the kind of moment that people would talk about for years. Billy was right. People would talk about it for years. But not for the reasons he expected. The decision to shoot at night in Manhattan was partly practical. During the day, controlling a crowd would be impossible. At night, on a Wednesday, they could rope off the block and have some control over who was there. Plus, the scene took place at night in the script anyway. Word got out. This was 1954. Marilyn Monroe was the biggest star in the world. Everyone knew that there was going to be a scene where her dress blew up. Thousands of men decided they wanted to be there to see it. By midnight, the crowd was already forming. At 1:00 a.m., there were at least 2,000 people pressed against the barricades. By 2:00 a.m., when filming was scheduled to start, police estimated 5,000 people were crammed onto Lexington Avenue. Almost all of them were men. Joe DiMaggio had come to New York with Marilyn for this shoot. They were newlyweds, married just 8 months earlier in January 1954. Marriage was already showing cracks, but they were trying. Joe had agreed to come watch Marilyn work, support her, be there for her. Joe didn't understand what he was walking into that night. Marilyn arrived on set around 1:30 a.m. She was wearing that white dress, the one designed by costume designer William Travilla. It looked simple, innocent almost. A white halter dress that fell to mid-calf, blowing, perfect for catching wind. Billy Wilder explained the shot to Marilyn. She would stand on the subway grate, had a giant wind machine underneath that would blow air up through the grate. Dress would fly. She would laugh and try to hold it down, but not too hard. The whole thing should look spontaneous, natural, sexy but sweet. How high will the dress go? Marilyn asked. As high as the wind takes it, Billy said with a smile. But don't worry, we'll do several takes. We'll get it right. What Billy didn't tell Marilyn was just how powerful that wind machine was, or how many takes he was planning to shoot, or that he had specifically allowed and even encouraged thousands of men to gather and watch. Because Billy Wilder understood something that Marilyn didn't yet. The real scene wasn't just the one being captured on film. The real scene was the spectacle, the event, the thousands of men watching Marilyn Monroe's dress blow up. That was the publicity. That was what would make headlines. That was what would make this movie impossible to ignore. Joe DiMaggio stood in the crowd with a friend, photographer Sam Shaw. They were behind the barricades with all the other spectators. Joe could see Marilyn on the street standing under the lights, could see the crew setting up. He could see the wind machine being positioned under the subway grate. And he could hear the men around, thousands of them, talking about Marilyn, about her body, about what they hoped to see, making crude comments, laughing, whistling before anything had even happened yet. Joe's face was already tight. This was his wife they were talking about. His wife they were here to ogle. His wife who was about to stand over a wind machine and let her dress blow up while thousands of strange men watched. At 2:15 a.m., Billy Wilder called for the first take. Marilyn stepped onto the subway grate. Cameras rolled. The wind machine turned on, and the white dress exploded upward. The crowd went insane. 5,000 men screaming, whistling, shouting. The noise was deafening. Marilyn laughed and tried to hold the dress down, but the wind was so powerful that it kept blowing the fabric up past her waist, revealing her white underwear to everyone on Lexington Avenue. The take lasted maybe 15 seconds. When Billy called cut, the crowd was still cheering. "Perfect!" Billy shouted. "But let's do another one, just to be safe." Joe stood in the crowd, his hands shaking. He had just watched 5,000 men cheer as his wife's dress blew up over her head. Just listened to them shout things that made his blood boil. And now Billy was saying they were going to do it again. Take two. Wind machine. The flying dress. The roaring crowd. Marilyn laughing. 5,000 men screaming. Take three. Same thing. More screaming. More whistling. Marilyn's dress flying higher. Joe's face getting redder. Take four. Take five. Take six. Each time the same scene, each time the same result. Marilyn's white dress billowing, white underwear visible to thousands. The crowd going wild every single time. Billy Wilder was loving. This was exactly what he wanted. The energy, the excitement, the absolute spectacle of Marilyn Monroe being Marilyn Monroe in front of thousands of people. Joe DiMaggio was dying inside. Each take felt like a betrayal. Each cheer from the crowd felt like a knife. This was his wife. His Marilyn, and she was being turned into a sex object for the entertainment of thousands of strange men. At take 7, Joe's friend Sam Shaw noticed something wrong. "Joe, you okay?" he asked. Joe didn't answer. He was just staring at Marilyn. His jaw clenched so tight Sam thought he might break his own teeth. Take 8, 9, take 10. The scene wasn't changing. Billy was just shooting it over and over from different angles with different camera positions. But the basic action was the same every time. Wind. Flying dress, exposed underwear, screaming men. Marilyn was starting to get cold. It was September in New York, and while it wasn't freezing, standing over a wind machine in a thin dress at 3 a.m. was not comfortable. Between takes, someone would bring her a robe. She'd warm up for a minute, then they'd shoot again. She could see Joe in the crowd, could see his face, could tell he was angry, really angry, but she was working. This was her job. This was the scene Billy wanted. This was what being a movie star meant sometime. By take 11, Marilyn was trying to signal to Billy that maybe they had enough, but Billy was relentless. "One more, just one more. Take 12, take 13, take 14. Finally, at nearly 5 a.m., Billy called it. "That's a wrap on this location. Great work, everyone." The crowd was still cheering as Marilyn hurried off the street and into her trailer. She was cold, exhausted, and could feel that something was very wrong with Joe. Joe came to the trailer. When he walked in, Marilyn tried to smile at it. "It was crazy, wasn't it? All those people." Joe's voice was low and dangerous. "What the hell was that? Do you mean?" "You know what I mean. Standing up there, letting your dress blow up, showing yourself to 5,000 men. Joe, it was a scene. It's for the movie." "It was a strip show," Joe said. 5,000 men just saw my wife's underwear. Saw them cheer and whistle while you showed yourself like some kind of—" "Don't!" Marilyn said, her voice sharp now. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." "This is what I've been trying to tell you," Joe said. "This is what Hollywood does to you. Turns you into something for men to stare at. Reduces you to just a body." "I'm an actress," Marilyn said. "This is my job." "Your job is to act, not to stand over a wind machine while thousands of strangers see up your dress." "You don't understand," Marilyn said, and she could feel tears starting. Not because Joe was wrong exactly, but because he was partly right and she didn't want him to be. "This is how it works. Billy wanted this scene. The studio wants this publicity. This is what makes me Marilyn Monroe." "I don't want Marilyn Monroe," Joe said. "I want Norma Jean. I want my wife, not some symbol that every man in America thinks he has a right to stare at." The fight continued in the trailer and later at their hotel. It was one of the worst fights they'd ever had. Joe felt humiliated, felt like his wife had been publicly degraded and didn't even care. Marilyn felt like Joe was trying to control her, trying to make her choose between him and her career. That night in New York, something broke in their marriage that couldn't be fixed. The scene itself wasn't over because what they filmed in New York wasn't usable for the actual movie. The crowd noise was too loud. The lighting wasn't quite right. The technical quality wasn't good enough. So 3 weeks later, they had to reshoot the entire thing. Hollywood, on a soundstage, with controlled wind and proper lighting and no crowd. Just the crew. That reshoot was the version that actually appeared in the movie The 7-Year Itch. The New York footage was mostly used for publicity, for behind-the-scenes story, creating the legend of that night on Lexington Avenue. The damage was done. Joe and Marilyn tried to keep their marriage together for a few more weeks after New York. The subway grate scene had revealed something neither of them could ignore. They wanted different things. Joe wanted a wife who would give up Hollywood and be Mrs. DiMaggio. Marilyn wanted to be a movie star. And those two things couldn't exist in the same marriage. On October 4th, 1954, less than 3 weeks after the subway grate scene, Marilyn Monroe announced that she was divorcing Joe DiMaggio. Marriage had lasted 9 months. At the press conference, reporters asked why the marriage ended. Marilyn wouldn't give details, just said there were incompatible career demands. Joe said nothing at all. People who were close to them knew. Marriage ended on Lexington Avenue at 2:00 a.m. on September 15. Marilyn stood over that subway grate and her dress flew up when 5,000 men cheered. When Joe DiMaggio watched his wife become public property. Years later, Billy Wilder would talk about that night, about the scene, about what it cost. "I knew Joe was there," Billy said in an interview. "I saw him in the crowd. I could see he was upset. But I was making a movie. I needed that scene. I needed that energy. Did I think about how it would affect their marriage? Honestly? No. I was thinking about the movie. I was thinking about publicity. I was thinking about creating a moment that people would remember. And I did. But I also helped end a marriage." The subway grate scene from The 7-Year Itch became one of the most iconic images in cinema history. That image of Marilyn in the white dress, the fabric billowing up around her, her hands trying to hold it down while she laughs, has been reproduced millions of times. On posters, in art, in parodies. The defining image of Marilyn Monroe for many people. But that image came at a price. It cost Marilyn her marriage, cost Joe his pride, and it revealed something uncomfortable about Hollywood and fame and what it means to be a sex symbol. Because Marilyn standing over that subway grate wasn't really about the movie. The scene in the actual film is sweet, innocent, playful. The filming of that scene in New York at 2:00 a.m. in front of 5,000 screaming men, that was something else. That was spectacle. That was exhibition. That was turning a woman into an object for mass consumption. And Joe DiMaggio, for all his flaws, understood that. He understood that his wife was being used. That the scene wasn't really about acting or art. It was about exploitation. About giving thousands of men what they wanted to see. Joe handled it well. No. He got angry. He fought with Marilyn. He tried to control what she could do with her own career. That wasn't right either. His anger came from somewhere real. Came from watching the woman he loved reduced to a dress flying up and underwear being exposed while men cheered like it was a sporting event. Marilyn understood Joe's anger, but she couldn't accept it, because to accept it would mean accepting that she should be ashamed of that scene. Should be ashamed of being sexy. Should be ashamed of being the woman that men wanted to look at. And Marilyn wasn't ashamed. Or she tried not to. She had spent her whole life being told she was too sexy, too provocative, too much. She had fought against that, had insisted that sexuality wasn't something to be ashamed of. Her body was hers to use as she saw fit. But that night on Lexington Avenue, with 5,000 men screaming, some part of Marilyn must have wondered if Joe was right. If maybe this had gone too far. If maybe there was a difference between being in control of your sexuality and being put on display for thousands of strangers. The subway grate scene represents everything complicated about Marilyn Monroe's career. It's iconic and beautiful and playful. It's also exploitative and objectifying and uncomfortable. Both things can be true at the same time. Joe DiMaggio never really got over that night. Even years after the divorce, he would talk about it with friends, about how angry it made, about how he couldn't protect Marilyn from being turned into a spectacle, about how Hollywood took the woman he loved and made her into public property. And Marilyn never really got over it either, not because she was ashamed of the scene, but because it cost her Joe. And despite all their problems, despite the fact that the marriage probably wouldn't have worked anyway, Marilyn always loved Joe, always wished they could have found a way to make it work. In 1962, 8 years after the subway grate scene and 8 years after their divorce, Marilyn was asked in an interview about that night in New York. "That scene made me a legend," Marilyn said, "but it cost me my marriage." Billy Wilder got his iconic moment. The studio got their publicity, and I got to be Marilyn Monroe. But I lost Joe. And looking back, I'm not sure the trade was worth it. When Marilyn died just a few months after that interview, Joe DiMaggio was the one who claimed her body, was the one who arranged her funeral. He banned Hollywood from attending because he blamed them for her death. For the next 20 years until his own death, Joe had roses delivered to Marilyn's grave 3 times a week. Joe never remarried. People asked him about it, he'd say, "I was married once. That's enough." He meant was, "I was married to Marilyn." Nothing else could compare. The subway grate scene is hanging on walls in homes and dorm rooms and restaurants all over the world. It's one of the most recognizable images in pop culture. It represents glamour and sex appeal and Hollywood magic. It also represents the price of fame, cost of being desired by millions. A moment when a woman's career and a man's ego collided and neither one could win. On September 15th, 1954, at 2:00 a.m. on Lexington Avenue, Marilyn Monroe stood over a subway grate and let her dress fly up 14 times while 5,000 men watched and cheered. She created an iconic moment that would last forever. She destroyed her marriage in the process. Some images cost more than we can imagine. Some fame comes at a price we can't afford to pay. And some nights end marriages before anyone realizes what's happening. If this story made you see that famous image differently, subscribe for more untold stories about the real cost of Hollywood moments. Hit that like button if you believe fame and relationships are sometimes impossible to balance, and tell us in the comments, did you know this scene ended Marilyn and Joe's marriage? You have made the same choice Marilyn did. Sometimes the most famous moments are the most painful ones. Sometimes what looks like triumph is actually tragedy. And sometimes a white dress blowing up in the wind is really a marriage falling apart in public. That's what happened on September 15th, 1954. The night Marilyn Monroe became an icon, and the night Joe DiMaggio lost his wife.